Hello. My name is Tom McIntyre, and I'm the Director of External Affairs at NYU Washington, D.C. And I'm delighted to welcome everybody to the Constance Milstein and Family Global Academic Center at New York University. This is our second year hosting 5 Films for Freedom, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Director of British Council USA, Lee Gibson, and the team responsible for putting on tonight's event, the Head of External Relations and Major Events, Kathy Kolpin, and the Projects Coordinator, Ava Baksh. Thank you for continuing to bring this dynamic festival and programming to NYU DC. I would also like to thank the NYU DC team, Lauren Hunt and Michael Yeager, and all the students who are volunteering tonight. Through the medium of film shorts, 5 Films for Freedom is able to tell the stories of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender experiences, helping to illustrate the truth that love is a human right and that intolerance and hate have no place in civil society. New York University strives to create a welcoming environment for all university students and faculty, not only for those who identify as members of the LGBT community, but for those who are interested in developing their understanding of the issues that affect this community. At a large global institution with hundreds of micro-communities, it is often challenging to foster meaningful cross-cultural interactions. Through programs like this one we are hosting tonight, we are able to create opportunities for students, faculty, and guests to deepen their understanding of the experience of others, raise awareness of the individual and collective injustices that confront many in our society. Although we continue to make progress, there is still an extraordinary need to create environments that are inclusive and supportive of diversity in the areas of sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. It is my hope that through the programming and festivals like 5 Films for Freedom, we all will challenge stereotypes and prejudice evident in our society today. And with that said, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Lee Gibson, the Director of British Council USA.
Hi, hello everyone. In the British Council, we're all about collaboration and mutuality, so it won't surprise you if I say thank you very much, Tom, to you, to Lauren Hunt, and to the whole team here at NYU, who have been so helpful and so welcoming. We're back for a second year, and I hope we'll be back again for a third year next year. Thank you all for coming to help us celebrate this year's 5 Films for Freedom. I'd like to thank our amazing panelists for giving their time this evening. I'd like to thank our filmmakers, Rosie Westhoff, Johnny Roth, and of course the filmmakers who aren't able to actually join us in person this evening. So the British Council, many of you know us, but for those of you who don't, our business is cultural relations. We're described as the UK's international organisation for cultural relations and educational opportunities. Bit of a mouthful. What it actually means is that we're in the relationship building business. We develop relationships between the people of the UK and people, especially young people, in the 110 countries we work in across the world. We're encouraging people to understand more about us, our own culture, our own values, and to share their values, their perceptions, their views on the world. And if that's what you do, then, you know, clearly, how could you not stress and develop programs to stress the importance of human rights? I mean, that kind of says it all, really. And you might think, well, you know, why do we actually need to say any more? I think it's about telling stories. It's actually about sharing values, sharing thoughts, sharing ideas, inspiring people through stories, and of course the medium of film is a fantastic way of doing that. So very briefly, I'm just going to give you a few stats because they actually tell a really powerful story, I think. In 2014, a couple of my colleagues, Brian E. Hansen, who's our director of film, and Alan Gemmell, who was then our director in Israel and is now our director in India, It came together with the Flare Film Festival in London and the British Film Institute and came up with this idea of creating the world's first online LGBT film festival to promote freedom and equality. We ran the world's first 10-day global online film festival and 24-hour social media campaign on the basis of love is a human right. This is our third year of running the festival and the second year of bringing the films to the USA. The first year, the campaign ran in 135 countries, including 43 countries that still continue to criminalize homosexuality. It's quite some thought. Last year, 2016, we reached 179 countries, engaging 140 million people and 1.5 million film views. You might be surprised to hear that some of the most engaged countries were Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iraq. We had views from countries like Rwanda, Equatorial Guinea, and the Maldives. So pretty impressive results, I think. In previous years, the 5 films which were chosen for the festival came from all over the world. This year, for 1 year only, so catch them while you can, all 5 films are by UK filmmakers. And this is our way of actually celebrating and marking the 50th anniversary of the decriminalization of homosexuality in the UK, a landmark moment for human rights. So thank you for coming to share the evening and share the films with us. We hope that you will enjoy the films. I'm pretty confident that you will. And please stay for the panel discussion, and please stay and join us for a drink afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you all for joining this evening's film festival, 5 Films for Freedom. Can we hear it one more time for all of the films that we've seen this afternoon? So before we actually jump into the conversation, I would like everyone to just kind of say a few words about yourself this afternoon. I know we have our bios in the program, but if you wanted to add anything or say anything to everyone here this afternoon, we can start off with that.
Cool. Shall I start?
Yeah, sure.
I'm Johnny, the director of Heavyweight. I'm usually a little bit more chirpy than this, but I think I'm starting to feel the jet lag. So, hello, and thank you all for coming.
And I am Rosie Westhoff, the writer and director of Crush, the first film.
My name is Amazon Letty. I'm the founder of the Amazon Letty Foundation. We're an NGO currently working in Vietnam, in the US, and doing capacity building on the ground in Canada, Australia, and the UK. And I'm also the global ambassador for Athlete Ally and Vietnam Relief Services.
Hi, I'm Lynn Sykade. I'm from the US Department of State, the director of the Office of Multilateral and Global Affairs, which is a very long name. We do a lot of things, including work on vulnerable groups, including LGBTI individuals.
And lastly, to introduce myself, my name is Maurice Eckstein. I am a volunteer relations manager with the Human Rights Campaign. In that role, I primarily travel the country and training and developing a lot of our board members for the organization. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. And as you can tell, we have a mixed panel. Some panelists of our filmmakers, and then some are also going to bring their particularly professional experience to the conversation. So before we jump into our professionals, let's talk about the films first. One of the questions I want to talk about first and foremost is your inspiration for making your respective films. If you can talk to that a little bit. Where did you get your inspiration from?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, you go first.
My inspiration, I mean, the original idea was from my best friend, Jess, who we lived together a few years ago, and she used to be so obsessed with this boy on the bus. and would see him every single day, every single day. And we'd talk about it all the time. And I think 2 years went by and she never spoke to him.
Wow.
And that's where the kind of original idea came from. And then I just really wanted to make a children's film, so I decided to make it about 14-year-olds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I suppose my inspiration, for Heavyweight was, so Chuck Yu, who plays the lead, Paris, we were friends before we made the film. We bumped into each other on a night out and we just said, oh, we need to do something, we need to work together. And we just kind of sat down and kind of like spoke about what kind of things that we wanted to kind of make about. And like he's from like London, very kind of like, you know, all this and all that, and I'm not from London. So we were trying to figure out what do we have in common that we can talk about. And he brought a lot of stories from his time in like a boxing gym and the people that were around him during and kind of coming and going into that world. And then I kind of like, and he kind of pitched this idea of kind of having, you know, like attraction amongst kind of like very manly men. And then I kind of was able to bring in a little bit of my side to that kind of thing from when I was younger, and we kind of like found the connection through that way. So it just kind of started from chatting and went from there really. So I don't know anything about boxing. I've never set foot in a boxing gym in my life, but it was a, you know, it was a very kind of like visceral kind of like sport to get involved with for that. So yeah.
You know, in film and with these shorts, you're able to very quickly tell a little bit about the human experience. In that, how have your films been received so far? And have you received any negative reactions at all?
So I mean, this film's been like, so I think the biggest reception for this film was the BFI Flare earlier this year. And that was like an eye-opening thing because I'd never really been part of like the LGBT world until then. And it was very interesting because the film itself was just supposed to like be about sexuality and how it's fluid, and that you don't need to know of its boundaries. And one of the things that when I brought it to that festival is how many people put their own kind of like interpretations of what that story was.
Right.
So whereas I saw it as a complete just kind of like, oh, these two guys have an attraction and they don't really understand why, it's not putting any definitions on their sexuality. That's what I went into it thinking that it was, and that it didn't matter, you know, they could be gay, straight, bi, anything, it doesn't matter. And the thing is that they're trying to figure that out in a world where they can't really express that.
Right.
But bringing it to people as well, you kind of like hear how people interpret that story and how it's different to how you may have thought. And I think that opened up a lot of different and interesting conversations through that. So not necessarily negative, but just definitely how people view everything themselves and how many different people have a different thing to say.
Right.
I think I've lost my point now. But
you're on track, it's fine.
Yeah.
I'll take
you
it.
take over.
Yeah, I think Crush has been, I mean, for me, Crush has been really well received. I never thought it would do anything really, because this is my first short film as a writer-director, and yeah, so I'm kind of surprised by it. It hadn't had any negativity until a couple of weeks ago, but it's not negativity. But I got an email from a mother to ask, I can't remember exactly what the email said, but the film was playing at a film festival in Milwaukee and was part of the children's programming, because typically that's what Crush has been programmed in at film festivals, is for children.
Right.
And I had an email from a mother saying that it was a part of the school group. Some of the parents were boycotting the festival because Crush had been programmed within the children's program.
Wow.
So she was a concerned mother, interested by the byline of the film, and wanted me to kind of sell it to her as to why she should take her children to see it. And if it maybe wasn't suitable for them. So I had lots of questions like, how old are they? And what do you think? But you can only do what you do.
Interesting, interesting. So I want to bring in our other panelists right now. So, you know, this year, the film festival is celebrating 50 years of decriminalizing homosexuality within the UK. As your foundation is sort of like growing with regards to capacity building, can you tell us with regard, how is your work sort of fitting in within the narrative of that as, you know, a worldly citizen, going back and forth between civilizations, and how are you taking that work back to Vietnam?
You know, I use Vietnam as a very interesting example because we're a communist country, but we have the fastest growing LGBT movement in the Southeast Asia.
Wow.
From 2012, we had the first Viet Pride, and 2017, we have 35 Viet Prides across the nation. And in history, LGBT has never been criminalized. So I can use this very interesting example of cross-cutting between a country where within its fabric it's been criminalized and how it's shaped its people and how over, you know, decades you have to work within that fabric to shift the conversation. Not saying that we don't have to shift that conversation in Vietnam, but when you look in history all the way back to when the French colonized Vietnam to the Vietnam War, being LGBT has always been within the fabric, within our community.
Right.
And when you don't have that element of who you love is criminal, then you can move on and speak about other things like anti-discrimination, marriage, equality, acceptance in a different way. You know, we don't have a religious movement in Vietnam. We're predominantly a Buddhist country.
Okay.
So there's that different element that I can use. And as an example, when I think of the UK, where it is a Christian country, may not have that very strong underpinning element that the US has, but there's a strong movement towards Christianity and how that plays such a major role in being LGBT and how that intersectionality plays out within the individual as well.
Interesting.
So I use that conversation as an example within the work that I do.
Awesome. And you know, I think all of these films are just example of love being that human right? And I wanted to bring Lynn in right now because we had a fascinating conversation with regards to love being a human right and what that sort of means, right? We broke down what is love and what does that look like specifically when it comes to laws around the world.
So what I had said was that love per se is not a human right because love is an emotion, right? So the issue is what is the content of all those things that make you able to love the person that you want to love and be open about that in society. Decriminalization is one of the major important efforts. Efforts against violence also are one of the major important efforts. But then also the things that we think of very simply in our own society: freedom of association, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, thought, and conscience. All those things pile into the content of what makes a person able to love the person they love in the society that they're in. So I think love is a human right. It's a great concept. Legally, however, it needs a little help.
And why I wanted to draw that is because we're all coming at the same conversation from different perspectives, right? And different realities as to your work. One of the things in the film, trying to make this as simplistic as possible, Rosie, in the choice of using really no dialogue as well, you were able to tell so much of that human element, right? Tell us about your choice of doing that, particularly in the film.
For me, the choice was like twofold because in a practical sense, if you can remember your first crush at 8 or 10 or whatever, you can't talk to the person that you have a crush on. If they sit next to you on the bus, you are not going to have a conversation. Well, that's at least my experience. So just in a practical sense, I wanted that to feel real. I wanted that to feel very real.
Right.
But then on the other side of it, when I was saying, oh, maybe there should be some conversation, or you know, toying with a voiceover for the girl talking throughout, what is she thinking? I was very adamant that I didn't want to do that because this is a children's film. I don't want to be telling them what that girl is feeling. I just wanted to be able for Maddie, who plays the lead, to just show it with her emotion in her eyes and everything. So, which I think she does beautifully. And yeah, I think because it was for children, I didn't want to be telling them how to feel, because I think at 12 years old, you're emotionally intelligent enough to get that.
And oftentimes, I mean, at 12 years old, we don't have the words just to put it in, right? At that point in time. I don't know what this awkward, weird feeling is. What's my skin tingling? I don't know. Right, awesome. Okay, thank you so much. Johnny, I wanted to talk about Heavyweight. One of the themes that really sort of shone in your film was masculinity itself. Did you have any challenge sort of filming around that and just that as a topic in itself?
I suppose, yeah. I mean, because I was coming to it from a point of the fact that I don't think I'm the manliest of guys. So I'm very in touch with my sensitive side, as it were. And so, you know, just, you know, I have all these kind of like doubts and insecurities of what it means to be a man, which are ingrained into kind of every part of any kind of guy's life. So not only am I trying to direct a film with two guys that are physically intimidating and very attractive in that sense, there was those kind of things that you're kind of wrestling with, but then also from their point of view, you know, these are two guys that hit the gym all the time, they're boxing, they do all these kind of things, and yet they have to then, the actors are both straight as well. So then they had to kind of like channel, how would they actually, you know, find, you know, if I was in this situation, what am I finding attractive about this person? What does that make me like? Because, you know, particularly again in the history of kind of boxing gyms, like you're just, you know, that you can't be all, you know, attracted to a man, because there's all the kind of like locker room banter with girls and all that kind of thing. So just kind of like coming to terms with all these different things going on and how we're going to break it down, we kind of just wanted to just really have at it, like, and kind of go from there. So I think that the challenges of working with that, coming back to your question in a really long way, was that none of us really knew what was going on. So we didn't know how that was going to come out. And I think that's just what it kind of is when you are attracted to something that you don't really understand.
Right, right. Interesting. In developing your films and sort of casting or bringing in your ideas and trying to tell your story, did you have any issues with unconscious bias or placing folks in there? Or if you had none, how do you prevent or stay away from it, or try to?
I'm a cultural studies major at university, so I was always taught we cannot be outside of our culture. We cannot get outside of it. So we're just always going to be biased. But I mean, for me, when working with Maddie, there was, because she's a 14-year-old girl, and I'm having to, you know, actually going into it with her, I said, look, when you're performing it, you can perform it in a way that is just, I think this girl is super cool. But you have to know that when the film goes out, you have to have the knowledge that when the film goes out, people are going to perceive it in the way that you could be gay or bisexual, whatever. So she was very aware of that. But I did just say to her, I want you to pretend that when you're going home, you are going home to tell your sister how exciting it was that you met this girl. So, because you live in a world, this character, you live in a world where none of that bias exists.
Right.
So then she could show her happiness when she was leaving. There's still all the awkwardness of having that first crush, But I didn't want that awkwardness to also be layered with, I'm not allowed to feel this.
Right.
So that was my way of kind of bringing the performance out without having any bias. But I think it's kind of impossible to not have it.
It's okay. Johnny, what about you? With regards to building the characters, the whole development of your film.
Well, I mean, I was quite lucky with this one because so Chucky and Jace again already knew each other, and we kind of like built the script from like the ground up together. And we kind of threw a lot of different things in, and we definitely like. It was a very natural kind of thing. They would go off and rehearse and come up with dialogue and do all this kind of thing. But I mean, it's just the questions related to the bias thing, is that sort of thing. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like whenever you make a film, like or do anything, you're only ever really going to know from your own perspective. So I think it's impossible to, again, just to get around unconscious bias because you wouldn't be conscious of it in the first place. I think you can be aware of like what you're saying and how to present yourself and try and put yourself into other people's shoes, and we try to live in a world where we can empathize with other people and understand everything, so you don't do anything silly or untoward or say the wrong thing, or you want to make sure that everyone is on the same page and equal. But I think with this film, it's sort of like with any moment of like the kiss, for example, and so I had a very exact way of how I wanted that to happen, whereas the two actors had a completely different way. And again, it's just about, they wanted it to be like really physical and violent because that's how they thought two men struggling to come to terms with the fact that they fancied each other would go. But whereas I came at it and was like, no, I think it's a very tender moment. So, but only because that's how I would feel if I wanted to do that to someone. So I guess, you can't, there's no way to get around it other than just listening and understanding each other until one of you wins, I suppose, in a compromise, in the artistic sense of the word.
Right. So earlier I mentioned, and we all know that again, this is celebrating the 50th year, the 50th anniversary of the decriminalization of homosexuality in the UK. And this would be for everyone, and everyone just kind of chime in where you want to. What type of influence do you see this kind of legal acknowledgement of love as a human right on public attitudes? What sort of influence on public attitudes do you see this storytelling influencing?
I mean, we're having this conversation backstage where we don't really like to use the word that it normalizes the issue. I mean, I think of my own community as part of the Asian Pacific Islander community. As soon as I'm born, I'm invisible. And I'm told that from society, from the media, from lack of representation within the film and TV industry. And when you have this public display, and particularly when it's, of legalizing being LGBT, it's within yourself, particularly from an API's perspective, we internalize so much of our pain. And that intersection of culture and sexuality intertwined with shame that's so heavily leveraged from our parents and our society, when you normalize an issue, when suddenly you can see yourself publicly, for many of us, it's like a revolution to be able to suddenly know that I'm not the only person that feels this way, that I'm not alone within my own feelings, that I know that who I am means something and it's not wrong. And the struggles that one has with gender expression and sexuality by portraying it in film through different platforms, whether that's through sports, whether that's through silence in movies, which resonates so much within the API community because so many times we can't express in words how we're feeling. So for us, sometimes pictures are the best way. It just makes you feel less alone in the world.
Wow, thank you for that.
And I would note, decriminalization is an essential thing. When you don't have that in a society, you have an LGBTI population which quite often can't get jobs, gets thrown into jail, is harassed, for a variety of things. oftentimes won't seek health care on issues where they really need care because they don't want to be found out.
Right.
Can be abused in jail in many ways because they don't have the protection of the law. So when you have a group that you can criminalize, it makes it very, very easy to mistreat them and for society to mistreat them. And so for us and for U.S. policy and many of the partners that we work with around the world, one of the first things we want to get our hands around and try to work on is decriminalization.
Can you tell me something? This festival, can you say how it has been a reflection of some of the work the State Department has been doing to sort of empower folks around the world?
I wouldn't, this festival I wouldn't say is necessarily a reflection of State Department, it's a reflection of the British Council. Right. But we do actually try to help people find their voice around the world. So we work on a lot of issues where we try to help civil society, of which LGBTI is a part, train in workshops and so forth. I know we've done some work in Vietnam that I know you're familiar with. We've done some work in Brazil and other places where we'll give digital training and so forth. A lot of workshops to help people understand how to present themselves. Oftentimes, we'll work with the community and try to mainstream them a little bit. So what does that mean? That means when an embassy has a meeting with non-governmental organizations, with civil society members, they also invite LGBTI individuals to the extent that people are comfortable. There are some countries in which people are not comfortable being out because being known is a risk to their health. Right. So one of the things we also do when we work with communities on the ground is to try to make sure that whatever we're doing isn't going to harm them. So oftentimes you might see, headline State Department, isn't saying anything about X group in this country. Part of that might be because we've actually been asked not to be so public and to do the work more quietly.
Does anybody else want to talk? You're good?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And I think as we're going along, if it's okay, that if anyone in the audience has any questions at any point in time, I can probably field some and then we can speak to that, okay? So as we're continuing on, with regards to your films and sort of what's next for you as filmmakers with your films, where do you see yourself going?
I mean, who knows, really? I mean, I'm going to continue along the path of exploring masculinity and how that affects, everything. I think that's something that I am interested in, and I can speak to that, and I kind of understand that a little bit. So I've just actually nearly finished making a short film about masculinity and how it's affected, but through gender expectation in a heterosexual relationship in that sense. And then I don't know what my next thing is going to be after that, but hopefully it'll be along those lines, and as long as it's a human story, that's what I'm kind of looking to go for. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And I have recently finished a short about a young woman, not LGBT, a young woman suffering from insomnia and depression. So that will be probably not as hopeful as the one that we just saw. But yeah, so I just finished that one, and I'm in prep for another one that I'm going to shoot in February in London. But a lot of, I was saying to Johnny, as like new filmmakers, I think, because we're also exploring this world, and we're just trying to find our way as well, because we're not, we're not making features. We're also not getting money for it yet. So I think it's important for me to be making films, writing what I know, making films about what I know. So I'm making lots of films about girls and female friendships and what it's like to be us.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Amazing. You talked a little bit around being invisible and a member of the API community and what that looks like. What do you think are some of your challenges moving forward, right, in terms of, not being a part of that invisible model minority anymore, or emerging from that? What do you think?
I think the greatest challenge that I have as an Asian advocate is that there are so few of us in this space. I mean, I think of the Vietnamese community. Globally, there are nearly 110 million of us but I'm the only person that people can pull from globally. And that says a lot in itself, and not that I want to kind of blow my own trumpet and be the first, but I want to be one of many. You know, and you know, when I walk into rooms, I'm usually one of one, and this stereotype that's perpetrated through the media of being this invisible model minority, that nothing ever happens to us. And I can throw out some very staggering statistics right now that the API community suicide is second to cancer. And there's a reason why that is when I think of your movie Crush, of how we internalize so much of our pain, and we're such a conformist community that everything has to be done within a box. And you know, we're very unique as a community because many of our countries, there's that one child policy, and we're immigrants in the US. So there's that pressure where your parent says, well, I've come all the way over here for you, my one and only child. So you can't be anything else but this mirror image that I've set for you. And I really hope that you go to Harvard University at the end of that as well, to be able to look after me when I'm old. You know, and I always say that coming out is a very Western ideology. For the Asian community, as soon as I'm born, it's about coming home. It's about what can I do for my family, the job that I can do, the university that my parents have already set for me, Harvard, Yale, such and such. You know, what can they say about me to my community, to their neighbours, and who is going to look after them when they're older? So being LGBTQ doesn't really fit into that model. And then when you look at Hollywood, only like 0.1% are Asian within lead roles, if that. And when I think of Heavyweight and that intersection of masculinity and how it plays out within the API community, API men within the film industry are so desexualized. You know, you will never see an API lead role who wins the girl who takes off his shirt and everyone just goes, ooh, over it. Or an Asian woman, we're so over-sexualized. You know, we're either the dominatrix or the geisha woman, and this is kind of pumped continuously within the media that as an Asian advocate trying to advocate on the rights of API LGBT, we have to get over that conversation first before then I can have a conversation with you. There are so little stats as well. They say out of the homeless LGBT youth population in the US, only 0.1% are API. It doesn't mean that we're not homeless, but the stats aren't there. When I look at New York, the community of color that has the highest poverty rate is the API community. API youth are bullied the most out of all ethnic communities. API LGBT acknowledge that they're bullied at least twice a month, if not more, by whites LGBT, but we don't hear of these stats. We don't hear of this epidemic of suicide within the API community, which makes it difficult then to have conversations as to why the API community needs funding, as to why there needs to be this conversation around our community. And I think film becomes this lovely platform of how we can then share these different stories and that intersection of gender expression and cultural identity, and how that intertwines within different people of color, and how within the API community, how shame is used as a leverage, and how then it makes it so difficult to show your gender expression or your sexual identity when you're so clouded in shame.
Lynn, do you have anything to add to with regards to the challenges moving forward? You can probably answer to how are these films sort of placed in the larger framework of efforts around the world?
So in the larger framework, one of the things that is key is education. So there are LGBTI individuals in every society of the world, no matter what they say. And I think it was Ahmadinejad who used to like to say there are no gay people in Iran. Right. Well, that was not true. So to the extent that we have filmmakers and artists who can help people be more aware, be more educated about what's going on in their own societies, that's a great thing. And it's something that I think we would support, you know, in particular, because it has to do with freedom of expression and freedom of association and the fundamental freedoms that are so very Western, are so very individualized, but that are so important to us in terms of being able to give people the space to be who they are and to love who they want to love.
Did we have any questions in the audience? I see one hand.
Well, this is suggested by the comment about South Asia, because I just finished watching a film called Tropical Malady, which is a Thai film which was produced about 2 years ago, which is a very beautiful film in 2 parts with, I wouldn't even call them gay overtones, but rather it was in 2 halves, and in one, something happens between a soldier in the countryside and a teenager, and in the second half, the soldier, a different soldier, played by the same actor, comes across, it's a legend in which a god tries to inhabit the soldier, and the god is played by a tiger in the form of the same young man. So there are 2 halves of the same story in terms of individuals, and it was beautifully done in terms of I wouldn't call it homosexual, I'd say unisexual film. It was a sex-less film in which 2 quite attractive men were playing these roles in which their interaction was perhaps sexual and perhaps not. And that was Thailand. And it led me to suspect that there's a lot more, perhaps there's more freedom than in Vietnam to make films like this. But I recommend that particular one. I have another comment, is that all of these films except Crush seem to be very sad to me. All of the tension in the heavyweight one, the one where the man changed was in a transition, and so on, all of them. But Crush seemed to be quite happy. And I was wondering if the jury who selected these films had their own unconscious bias toward a negative approach to perhaps a subject.
I don't know who out of the British Council and the BFI selected the films. I think that the process it may go through, and the British Council might be able to speak to this a bit better, but that there are different programmers at the BFI who choose certain films to be in certainly curated
buckets?
Yeah, curated buckets. And then I guess out of that, the British Council kind of watch what they think they want to represent parts of the UK and maybe people from the UK. For me, yes, when I made Crush, I made it to be very, very hopeful. But when I watch Still Burning, oh my God, that's so hopeful, and I love that. And also, where we are now, I see that as really hopeful, and their family life to be really hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think you can take what you want at the end of films, and I think some people probably take from yours hopefulness. The end of Jamie's is quite sad, but then it's just a vignette. These short films are vignettes in people's lives, and I'm sure they're going to go on to happiness as well.
I see one hand in front, and then we'll come down front. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Just a quick comment about Crush. It was a beautiful movie with virtually no dialogue except one word, I believe. And it's being shown here as a GLBT movie, so I saw the sexual attraction, but then when you said it's being shown at children's festivals, is there any interpretation that it was simply a matter of envy on the part of the young plain girl with her very glamorous counterpart?
Yeah, I think it depends who's watching the film. I think that if you've got an open mind and you watch the film, I think that you come away thinking, oh, this is the girl's first crush, and maybe something will happen, and are they going to see each other again? But if you've been brought up and your mind's a bit more closed, you probably leave and say, like one friend of mine said, oh, I didn't see it as a crush. I just thought that thought she was really cool. And I'm like, the name of the film's Crush. But you can see what I mean by that. And then some people think that it's sexualized, and some people say, how can it be sexualized if it's 14-year-old girls? And I say, because it's sexualized when you're 14, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, so this message, or this question is for Rosie also. Why did you decide to choose a girl and not a boy or another actor?
Has anyone read Hulk's screenwriting book? Okay, so Hulk, the screen critic. He writes about flipping the sex. So I actually wrote it as a boy and a girl. She was actually originally Jack. Because, you know, that's how I've grown up, and you write what you know, and so I wrote it as that. And then when I was rewriting it, I just thought, no, because this film has been made so many times before, and it's so boring. and actually, I just really want to tell female stories and cast females. So I was just like, no, let's just make them two girls, and it just makes it so much better. So I think originally that's why.
Thank you.
And I saw a hand up here. Yeah.
This is a question for Rosie. I was just wondering if you were able to persuade the mother from Milwaukee to let her kids watch the movie.
She never wrote back to my email, actually. I replied to her. I replied to her asking, you know, because I also want to try to be diplomatic as well. So I replied to her asking how old her children were who were going, because, you know, I've had 3-year-olds watch this film and they just think it's really cute. So, but when it played at TIFF Kids, and it was in the 8 to 13 bracket. So at least I knew from that it was categorized, because they classified it, for 8 to 13-year-olds. So I said, you know, 8-year-olds have watched it. I explained that it was actually 2 14-year-old cast members, not 16-year-olds playing 14-year-olds, that their parents were fully aware of the script and what it was supposed to be about. I didn't want to send her a link to the film, though. I thought about it. I thought about sending her a link, and then I thought, no, because what if she sees it and then she doesn't want to take her children? But maybe if I give her the hope to go and see it. But she didn't reply.
I'm seeing some. Oh, yes, right here.
I don't have a question. I just find it shocking that people don't think that teenage girls are sexual.
I think that mothers no, this is such a generalization. I think that people forget. I think that people forget how old they were when they had their first crush. I mean, I think my first maybe sexualized crush was like as young as 7 or 8, and it's spoken a lot more with boys. Yes. Because when you're little, you think, oh, because you can see it, right? When you've got a crush, when you're a boy. But it's the truth. No, but it is the truth, and that's how it's really hard for girls, because you can't see it and you can only feel it, and nobody talks about it. So, yeah, I mean, I purposefully made them 14 because I worried that it was too taboo making them 10 or 11. So, yeah.
Well, I like that way to sort of bring our conversation to a close, unfortunately. Yeah, but you can see it. You can feel it. You can't see it, right? Love is a human right. I think I'm trying to make it happen. Come on, be with me. So, as we're wrapping up this afternoon's conversation, do you have anything to have our folks take away with them?
Well, love is a human right. There you go.
I don't know. Tell me. Love is human right. But I think talk more and tell these stories more, because really think of these ideas, because we eavesdrop on people's conversations. I do.
Of course, love is a human right, but I think sharing our stories is a revolution, if that's through the power of film in particular, because just for a moment you can just get a glimpse of what it's like to walk in my shoes.
Thank you.
I think as I sit here thinking about the work that we do abroad, and this is going to be a little more depressing, so I'm sorry. I think about the privilege that we have of being able to tell our stories and to be able to tell them openly and freely in the societies that we live in. And I would encourage you to take a look at those countries where this kind of conversation would have us all in jail tonight. And think about, what can we do to help people who are in much, much worse places than we are.
Well, on that note, I want to personally thank the British Council for having me, for having all of our panelists. It's interesting that being here as a citizen of a country that is a former British colony that still has LGBTQ status criminalized, Trinidad and Tobago. And so to be here, to be privileged to listen to these conversations, hear these stories, it is very inspiring. So I want to thank you personally for all the folks who could not be here. Thank you for making these stories, and thank you for telling them. And thank you both for being here as well, and keep doing amazing work. Can we hear it one more time for our panelists? Thank you. Thank you.